With shocking ease and speed, we meet our first child for sale. A message from my wife, yeah? We pretend to film a home video to make a record of our prize finds.
Why did you decide to make your first film on trafficking, which I think everyone here realizes is not an easy subject?
The first film I made on trafficking was about sex slavery. Very difficult and emotive subject. These were women and children in some cases that were being trafficked around Europe to work in brothels. And I decided to conduct an investigation into what was really going on. What spurred on the traffickers? Where was the demand coming from? How did these girls end up being forced to work in brothels? And I'd grown tired as a journalist of seeing, and even doing myself, the box standard films, which would be a victim in silhouette who you couldn't identify, and perhaps footage of a police raid on a brothel with victims being taken out of the brothel covered in blankets and the traffickers or the brothel owners in handcuffs being taken to a police van. To me, those kind of reports said, yes, trafficking's happening, yes, girls are being trafficked around Europe to work in European brothels, but why? How does it work? How does it happen? And then came the difficult questions, the questions of how do we do that? How do we expose it? How do we get in to that underworld? How do we do it properly? And no one else had done it because presumably it was almost impossible to do.
What difficulties did you face editorially and legally?
What we decided to do, the only way to uncover what was really happening, how traffickers operated, how victims became victims, and where the demand was coming from, was to actually get into that underworld, become part of that underworld. And there's only two ways of doing that. You either become a victim yourself of trafficking, well, that's not going to work. So then the other option was to actually become a trafficker. It takes one to know one. So I decided that I would become a trafficker. I would get involved in the sale of women and children in the sex industry. A lot of media law issues and editorial policy issues were involved in that. First of all, the protection of the crew, the film crew. And the only way we could protect ourselves is by having constant open lines of communication, either by phone, using GPS, so people in London and a team in a nearby hotel knew our exact location and where we were, and trying to check in with London and a local team as much as we could to let them know we were safe. That was all we could do. It was the best we could do. But there was always going to be that danger that they would realise we were journalists or suspect we were the police. The other bigger issue was the fact that we were going to identify victims. We were going to find victims of trafficking. We were going to end up filming them and meeting them. And as we all know, any professional journalist, any decent broadcaster will already know that a victim comes first. Before your film, before your investigation, you have to bring help to that victim. Even if it means that victim not being part of your film, you can't use that footage. The only way we could get around that was in two ways. One, to always have a local charity very nearby to where we were filming, so if we were able to rescue them there and then, we could get them to safety as quickly as possible. And then we also made the unprecedented move, something that journalists would always feel uncomfortable doing, because we're not a police agency, we don't work for the police, we don't gather intelligence for them, we have to keep that distance from the authorities. But because we had to protect the victims that we may meet, we made the unprecedented step of involving the police and European police agencies. And they agreed to work with us, and we agreed to work with them. Ultimately, that meant that some of the victims we met and filmed didn't end up in the documentary for their own protection, and arrests quickly followed. But some of the victims and the traffickers did end up in the film, and the police agreed to make arrests and rescue victims as the films were broadcast. So we got our film, they got their traffickers, and they got their victims. It was an uncomfortable relationship, but it was one that worked. And the main reason why we got the police on side is that some of the footage that we'd already managed to film blew them away. They had never seen the inside of a trafficking operation like that before. They realised that I was gathering intelligence that they never had, and they wanted me to continue with my work. So we worked together, and it involved the Romanian, Czech, Serbian and British police, multiple agencies across Europe. It was very complicated, but it worked.
Were you prepared for absolutely everything you came across?
We weren't prepared for absolutely everything we came across. We thought we had ourselves covered. But in Romania, we ended up in a town called Iași, where it became clear to us that the police there were involved in trafficking. And we only realised that when we were already undercover and filming and dealing with traffickers. And a young 14-year-old girl was being offered to us for sale. We couldn't go to the police because they were involved, and it would put our lives and the victim's life in danger. And we weren't prepared for this. We didn't quite know what to do. We couldn't trust the Romanian police. So we made a very controversial decision. We had a charity with us, a local Romanian charity that looked after victims of trafficking once they were rescued by Romanian intelligence, Romanian agencies. But the Romanian police that we could trust were too far away. They were 12 hours away in Bucharest. We had to find safety for this girl that was being offered to us there and then. So I bought her. I paid 800 euros, and as a trafficker undercover, I actually purchased a human being, which is something we promised ourselves we wouldn't do because we didn't want to hand money over to criminals. That girl then becomes our responsibility. But it was a damned if you do, damned if you don't decision. If we'd walked away, people would have criticised us for leaving her in danger. We may never have found those traffickers and that girl again. If we buy her, then we're criticised because we've given criminals money and we've taken a girl. But as we had a local charity with us who had her best interests at heart, we decided we had to buy her, so we bought her.
Well then, at the end of the day, has it absolutely been worth it?
There are times I feel it wasn't worth it. There was a lot of pressure on me after the films were broadcast. My safety was constantly at risk. The traffickers that I exposed were all imprisoned for 8 years. These were Serbian, Romanian and British traffickers and brothel owners. They issued death threats against me. I had to testify in court against the traffickers. I have a reinforced door, I have CCTV, I never stop watching my back. So yes, there are times I think, was it really worth it? But the fact that 7 years later I'm sat here talking to you about this first investigation I conducted into trafficking suggests to me it's still an important issue that still needs to be discussed, that still needs to be addressed. And at the end of the day, we rescued victims, we imprisoned traffickers, and we highlighted an issue. And I have to constantly remind myself that while at times it feels there was a huge personal cost, particularly to my safety, it was worth it. It really was worth it. And that investigation into sex slavery inspired me to do several more investigations into trafficking. So I've kept going. I've kept doing it. Let me do that bit again. So that first investigation inspired me to make several more investigations into human trafficking. So I can't regret it that much because I've kept doing it. And I think an editor once said to me, if the story is easy to do, it's not a story. This is the most difficult story you can ever do. And to me, that makes it a story.
Chris Rogers, thank you very much for, well, at the least an enlightening and stimulating talk with you, and on behalf of Prix Italia, we express our gratitude. Thank you.